Everybody for coming out today. I hope it wasn't too early for you. Anyway, I'm Jared with Engineering New Product Development for CI Medical Technologies. We are a custom injection molder, facilities in Puerto Rico, Texas, Juarez, the UK, and Latrobe, Pennsylvania. We spent a few minutes talking this morning. Managing tight tolerance. Ways around them. Oh, mic's on, mic's off. We're good. Am I hitting it? Loose cable. All right, good. All right, awesome. If you guys can't hear me, let me know. About managing tight tolerances, why they have the need for tight tolerances, if there's ways around them, how you manage them successfully, and how we can help you ensure that you get a successful project if you have the need for tight tolerances. So let's start with a question. Tight tolerances or fine tolerances, commercial tolerances may mean different things to different people. I want to kind of ask the crowd what they mean to you. So this is the interactive part of the presentation where you guys are supposed to speak up. What do they mean to you?
What I wonder if you have a wall.
Okay. Okay. All right, we can talk about that, certainly. Anybody have any other definition of what a tight tolerance may be? Plus or minus 3, plus or minus 1, even tighter, even less? Scott? Okay, all good answers. We define it a little bit at CI. Really define it into the amount of engineering and effort it takes to be successful with that tolerance. You could have a commercial tolerance, so it's really a general basic tolerance. Doesn't require any specific tooling. Good? I can just talk loud. All right. It's commercial tolerance. It can be achieved and held quickly and easily. You don't need any special steel conditions. There's no need for any special equipment. It's easy to measure. It's very repeatable. There's fine tolerances. A tolerance that can be achieved and held with some special considerations. You may want to go steel safe on that particular type of core or cavity or whatever it may be. Where you're really biasing the steel dimensions in that one direction or another to know that you're not going to hit it right off the bag, but you want to do it in a conservative manner that's easy to change and fix. We okay? All right. And then tight tolerances, which are really tolerances that are beyond the recommended fine ranges. It's typically where you get in your plus or minus 1, plus or minus a half, plus or minus 2, or they could even be plus or minus 6 or 7 thousandths of an inch if you're dealing with a part that's very long. So just to have one solid definition and one number really isn't accurate and really isn't going to get you what you want. And tight tolerances could take significantly more time and more money to develop. It could also potentially result in something you certainly don't want, which is a design that's unfeasible. It's just something that can't be manufactured within the tolerance band that you allow, can't be validated, and you have to fall back on some level of verification or in-process check, even in-process sorting to determine which components are good and which are bad. How do they impact your project? I don't know if some of you have tight tolerances, you deal with them, you see the impact, you see an additional cost, you see an additional time delay. And it really affects all of those. You're dealing with tool development time, increased cost for changes, you're risking your long-term supply consistency, or you may just not have a requirement that's capable. We talked about tool development time. If you have a tolerance, say plus or minus a half thou or plus or minus 1 on a larger dimension, you may have to go through additional steel tunings, additional samplings, additional metrology work. You may have to repeat the process more times. Each time you do that, it's delaying your speed to market, which is really the large impact that you just can't afford on critical projects like that. So you try to plan for it as best as you can, knowing you're going to have to make changes so that you can do them as quickly as possible. Every time you go through that development cycle, you're increasing cost, you have a potential for higher scrap rates. Again, you may just not be able to validate with a robust CPK number to a specific tolerance. So you have to fall back on in-process verification or even 100% inspection, which is adding a significant amount of cost as well because of the labor and the processes or the capital equipment that are involved in that. You could also risk your long-term supply consistency if you're processing at a pinpoint process instead of a robust process window. any components you produce, you may have a chance that they may not be good. So you're risking the components that are in the field, components that you have in inventory, what you have in the warehouse, or what's in transit, what's in the process of being shipped. Or you just may not meet the requirement for the capability. Who does it impact? Well, it impacts all of us. It impacts all of your molders, it impacts your customers, it impacts the OEM. Your quality of assurance and your supply is at risk as well if your chosen supplier excuse me, does not have a plan or appropriate controls in place to manage the process successfully. The parts may not go together, they may not be performance requirements, they may not be shipped in a consistent manner. You could have line down situations, go into back order situations as you're trying to adjust steel, you're trying to adjust quality, you're trying to inspect quality into the product of your component. At the end of the day, you have a dissatisfied customer and you have the safety hazard. Two things which nobody in this room can afford. If your designs truly do require tight tolerances, and they very well may, you say, hey look, I got a design, I need it to be very tight. There's just no way around it. That's the requirements of the specific design. And we ask ourselves, is this becoming more frequent? Is it becoming the normal instead of the exception? And we feel at CI that it is becoming more the normal. We're seeing more effort and more formal process put in place for design for manufacturability. And what you're doing is you're optimizing the cost of the add-on components or manufacturing flow later down the line. You're building fewer tools, but you end up with more complex components. It's not a bad thing, but you're asking what used to be 5 or 6 different parts, each to perform a simple function. You now have one large complex component that's requiring you to do a wide variety of specific requirements from a form, fit, or function standpoint. We have a component at CI actually that's about the size of an iPad. It has 450 first article dimensions and 65 critical to quality capability dimensions. It used to be 5 or 6 different components, but now it's one. You only have one tool, you only have to order one component. The assembly processes downstream are a lot more simplified. It's putting more challenge on the molder to be better engineers, to be more successful with those type of products, and have the systems, metrology, and processes in place to manage them appropriately. We also see more focus around design for Six Sigma. Years ago, you may had an acceptable capability range of 1.0, then it was 1.3, and now we're seeing designs required for Six Sigma, which is really a 2.0 or even greater capability number to minimize the risk of the dissatisfied customer and the safety that we talked about earlier. Really what you're doing with that is you're further reducing the allowable tolerance window. Say you have a plus or minus 2 thou, gives you 4 thou total. If you're requiring a capability number to 2.0 within that 4 thou total, essentially you've shrunk that window of acceptability down to 2 thousandths. So now you may have a plus or minus 2 on the print, but I know I have to be consistent to plus or minus 1 in order to hit that specific capability number. We're also seeing a lot more GD&T. Seeing a lot more training, a lot more communication on the print around surfaces, profiles, flatnesses, locations, all becoming more prevalent. Again, it's challenging the molder to become better engineers, to know their technology, to know how this works, and to be able to report out accurately and repeatedly the data that you see through GD&T. GD&T is a bit tricky. You could have a surface profile requirement of 5. And it's a CTQ, it's a critical to quality dimension. You need to report a capability number on that. You could report a capability number, hey, my capability number is 2.0 at a 4 thou surface profile. And that's great, but what if you're bad? What if you fail? What if you have 6? That doesn't give you enough information to go back and debug. You don't know, is it a tooling problem? Is it a processing problem? Where am I falling out of specification on this? So you need to have more information from that. So you enable yourself to go back through the basic tolerances, the basic dimensions, really recreate the tolerance stack up through the basics that are required to hit that specific surface profile, just to be able to make intelligent decisions on tooling. And the landscape's changing even more. As you walk around the trade show today, bless you, you walk around the trade show today, you're seeing more and more really 3D component control. You're seeing more equipment, more laser scanners. We're seeing the PMI, which is product manufacturing information, model-based definition, or 3D-based GNT. We're seeing the days when you used to have paper prints and 2D drawings go away. They're being replaced with 3D annotated models that control and contain the GD&T information within that specific model instead of having to fall back on a paper print. They're communicating the requirements of what's acceptable for that component, including surface finishes, flatnesses, profiles. Is really what we're seeing. So again, as a custom injection molder, we have to evolve and change and adapt to those specific requirements. At CI Medical, we are the expert provider in tight tolerance molding. How are we successful at hitting those tight tolerances? When you need to have a tight tolerance to make a robust design if your specific case requires that. We have a focused approach that looks at true requirements, material selection, part design, tooling design, construction, process control, manufacturing equipment, metrology equipment, and data generation. You start with what's truly required. Oftentimes we may see, if it's a CTQ dimension, it's got to be a plus or minus 1,000. Well, that's not necessarily true. Do your engineering, do it right up front. That's something we can help you with, or any good molder would be able to help you with to save your time and money. Do you truly need to have that dimension at plus or minus 1? Your tolerance stack-up doesn't directly relate to the quality and the consistency of your product. Do your engineer up front. You can do an arithmetic tolerance stack-up, use a root sum square, which oftentimes gives you a little bit more of an acceptable window. Take advantage of the principles of your tolerance stack-ups as well, and that's again something that CI has the ability to help you with up front. And what you're doing by improving your engineering up front is reducing the speed to market, reducing additional cost, and reducing the risk of having bad components because your design isn't requiring a tolerance that would be that tight. Material selection is a very important part as well. If you remember back to the 3 definitions that we talked about, the commercial, the fine, and the tight, material selection is paramount critical to a lot of this. You can see these are some basic charts and graphs that we look at from time to time at CI, where we have a brown line for fine amorphous, red for commercial amorphous, fine crystalline, and commercial semi-crystalline. Anything to the left of where the fine is for the amorphous and to the left of where the blue is for the semi-crystalline material are what we consider to be a tight tolerance range. So if you're designing a component, you say, I have 1 inch and I need that dimension to be plus or minus 2. For an amorphous material, you know what, you're looking at the fine dimensions. That tells the engineering staff and the designers, hey, I got to take special care in this mold. I need to build it correctly. I need to make sure I have the right type of measurement equipment, right type of metrology. The same information for semi-crystalline materials as well. They're often more flexible. They're not as dimensionally stable, although there's some differences within those specific materials. But this is a chart that will help guide you and make those right decisions up front. This is just some more information on specifics of materials, specific of resins. This is type of information that CI is able to provide you up front to say, hey, if I'm doing plus or minus 0.003 on 2 inches with a polyethylene material, I'm going to say that's far and beyond what's considered a fine tolerance. You're going to struggle with that. You need to have the right equipment. You may not be able to validate. You may have to fall back in in-process verification. And those are things that a project management communicate as a risk up front to really be able to help guide the path of that specific project. You have the same type of material selection for semi-crystalline materials as well. There are ways you can improve specific materials. If you have a list of approved materials that have gone through your bioburden or biocompatibility testing, the fibers can help minimize part variation. They can minimize inconsistent sink and inconsistent warp in your component, but you have to be wary of anisotropic shrinkage, which is a difference in shrinkage across the flow as opposed to the length of the flow. Clarifiers and semi-crystalline resins are something else that can help you as well by limiting the cooling time. Your part design considerations. Follow good design principles. Gate, so you flow thick to thin. Minimize any large regions of material like gussets, bosses, ribs. Maximize the tolerances across open space in design. If you have a horseshoe-shaped component, you have a large hole in component, try not to dimension a critical dimension across the width of that horseshoe or across that hole. Again, follow good design principles. There's a lot of reference materials. Good molders will be able to provide you with a lot of this information in parallel with your design. Limit points or surfaces of contact, limit contacting edges, or use self-contained sub-assemblies. Instead of fitting 50 different components into a housing or a handle, make smaller sub-assemblies and put those sub-assemblies into the large assembly. Do not tightly tolerance parting line surfaces or in areas that are prone to sink. And what we have is a simple T here with the rib. Some of you may know you're going to be prone to seeing a void or a sink in here. And what that is going to be inconsistent. It's something that's difficult to control from a tooling or a processing standpoint. So you want to work to ensure that you don't have, say, a critical flatness on that surface or a critical dimension that's controlled by that. You need to find another way to do it because your design is naturally leading to an inconsistent product. As molders, there's ways we can help you work to and improve that. But it's a problem that the entire team faces that's working on a product design. There's a lot of tooling considerations you can do as well. We talked about steel safe features. Design those critical features to be steel safe and plan for the schedule impact of that. You want to focus on improving cooling in hot spots or in areas that have critical dimensions. You can improve cooling by conformal cooling, contour cooling, beryllium copper, mold max, or high heat transfer material in that specific area, really to give you that extra bit of control that you need so that you don't have a component that's warping and shrinking differently. Make every attempt to control critical dimensions in a solid piece of steel. You don't want a plus or minus 1 dimension that's off of a surface that's controlled by a cam, a slide, an ejector pin, or any type of steel that's prone to wear or movement. It's just harder to adjust that, especially when you're talking about dimensions and tolerances that are less than 2 thou or 1 thou. Don't design critical features across parting lines. We talked about the ejector pins, sleeves, plates, cam surfaces, or slides. And our advice is do not attempt to hit those tight tolerances that may be to the left of the fine region I showed you earlier for first shots. It's really a risk versus reward. If you hit it straight out of the box, great, you've saved yourself a couple weeks. But if you don't, you have to go back, make that steel safe change or adjustment. If you've planned appropriately up front, that may save you a week. The risk with this is if you're not successful and you have to rebuild a core or a cavity or a large piece of steel, instead of looking at a weak adjustment, an adjustment that's very low cost, you're looking at an adjustment that could take 8 to 12 weeks conceivably and cost a significant amount of money. Again, you're just trying to balance that risk versus reward scenario in every aspect of your engineering. The process controls as well is something that is able to achieve tighter tolerances. And some of you may have sat through an RJG or a Kistler seminar like this, and the pressure transducers and the thermocouples that those companies produce are very successful, using strong scientific injection molding principles as a baseline for establishing your robust process window. Monitor control peak and area of a resultant pressure curve. Transfer from fill to pack using cavity pressure instead of preset distances or times within your specific press. What you're doing there is you're enabling the monitoring of an output instead of the controlling of an input. So if your non-controllable input, such as material viscosity or slight variations in mold temperature, melt temperature change, you're able to account for that in a process window from a closed loop standpoint by transferring on that fill to pack signal instead of on a preset distance that's determined up front. Monitor and preventative maintenance on critical items. These are manufacturing considerations, things you can do from a manufacturing and equipment standpoint to be successful with tight tolerance molding. You want to monitor your checkering wear, have a robust PM plan in place to control that. Your hydraulic systems can wear and lead to inconsistency. You want to be able to thermal control more consistently, and there's equipment and tools you can buy to help you do that. Water flow rate, consistency of cooling. Your molds wear, your gates wear, you want to ensure the mold's thermally stable, your cavity surfaces can wear, your tool vents lose integrity over time. They could get clogged by outgassing, by fillers, by color, or they just get smashed flat after being put under hundreds of tons of force every cycle. Metrology considerations is a big aspect and one I'm going to talk and focus a little bit more about. You need to choose the appropriate equipment and really use your data to guide your path forward. Your parts may be perfectly acceptable, they may be good, but if you don't have data telling you that, then the parts are really worthless. They could function appropriately for that specific instance, but you're not meeting the tolerance requirements on that print. You ensure you have a good plan from a metrology standpoint, understand what the data your metrology is telling you, and react accordingly to that. As a process change, as a material change, as a tool change, all your data from metrology should be able to tell you that. And there's really no best method. Each application, each material, each dimension has a specific type of measurement equipment that would be more suited for measuring that dimension in a repeatable and robust manner. We tend to group these into a couple of categories. I'm going to review them very quickly. Manual physical equipment. These are your gauge pins, your calipers, your indicators, micrometers, manual CMM. The good thing is they're easy to use. They don't cost a lot. Just about anybody that's in a metrology lab has the ability to use these with very little training. The problem is it leads to usually higher gauge R&Rs. Sometimes you don't get the variability needed with a set of pin gauges. You also must consider part deflection. If I were to take a caliper and measure something, the amount of force and the speed that I push that caliper shut is going to lead to a higher R&R number than than anybody else in this room, really. You're just going to have a difference in data and a difference in output. Is it good for some dimensions and some requirements? Yes, absolutely, because of what I mentioned before, but it's not the best for everything. We have the optical equipment, vision system, comparators. It's easy to find a min, a max, and ovality. It clearly identifies the presence, impact of sync, parting lines, flash, mismatch. Anything else that could be inconsistent and lead to unacceptable variation in your process or your components. It's very quick on low frequency inspections, good for first articles that have hundreds of dimensions. It does require some simple fixtures. It's also good on soft or flexible parts because you're not actually physically touching the component in any fashion. You don't have the inconsistency that pin gauges, comparator, or pin gauges or calipers would give you on a soft, flexible component. They do require more training on the lighting, and the lighting environment does have an effect on your dimensions. It also relies on manual interpretation at times of what is an edge and what is a surface. Programmable OGP, another type of equipment. This is easy non-touch inspection. It's very easy to calculate TPI. A lot of these are programmable. Under the right lighting conditions and the right training, they can be highly accurate. They can also measure complex dimensions very quickly. The downside, it does require training, and you often need fixtures, which cost more money and take more time to develop those fixtures, but do lead to robust numbers. Programmable CMM is highly accurate. It's easy to generate complex GD&T data. It's very easy to get true positions, to get cylindricity, to get surface profiles, to get flatness with a piece of equipment like a CMM. It's low labor during inspection. If you have a component we mentioned before, it has, say, 65 critical dimensions. All you do is you snap the part into the fixture. Once your program's done, you hit a button, you're able to walk away. You come back in 45 minutes or however long your program takes to run, and you have good data. It's also helpful from an SPC standpoint to be able to generate that automatically downstream. This also, again, requires a high level of training. Often requires complex fixtures that have to secure the component in place without deforming it. It only measures where it's programmed to. So if you're taking diameter and you're measuring on an 8 points or 12 points, if there's an area of gross flash or gross sync that if you're looking at it can easily pick up and see, the CMM is not going to see that. It's only going to touch and measure where you've programmed it to touch and measure. There's also a lot of new technologies. Again, if you walk around the floor today, you'll see CT scanners, you'll see laser scanners, you'll see surface scanners. These are highly accurate. They do capture all the surface, and they're very good for soft, flexible components, again, because you're not physically touching the part. They are expensive. They do require some training. A CT scanner, there's some environmental issues. Some states you can have them, some you can't. The laser scanner as well isn't as highly accurate as something, say, a CMM would be. You get about half a thou of accuracy with a laser scanner. It allows you to be very good at measuring complex surfaces, but may not give you that degree of accuracy that you need at the end. And your R&R is going to tell you that. Soft parts, I've talked a few things about soft parts before. They present their own special little set of challenges. We do recommend optical inspection. Gauging and fixturing, you often have to make a determination. Do I measure this as a free-form component, or do I constrain it somehow? If it's a soft mat or a gasket, do I have to stretch it over the physical component? Tight tolerances may not necessarily be needed on a soft, flexible part. And this would be like a flexible PVC, a urethane, or an elastomer, a lot of common injection molded components. We've tried modification factors in the past where you're measuring, say, a gasket with a CMM, and each time you hit it with a touch probe, it's deflecting a little bit and trying to get almost like you're programming a fudge factor in your CMM. And we find that that's really not reliable, certainly not recommended, and the times we've tried it, it just hasn't worked. And that's really because the stiffness of the durometer. Your material may vary from a lot to lot condition. You're relying on how much that deflects in order to give you good information. So we recommend back to the optical inspection. Let's go through a couple quick examples to help clarify what we talked about. So this is a fine tolerance. If you go back to your initial charts that we drew up there, as a fine tolerance, it's a plus or minus 3 thou on a ID of a polycarbonate component. It's amorphous material, which is a pretty reliable, repeatable material. Measured the same dimension with the CMM, with the vision system, with pin gauges, and with the manual CMM. An interesting thing to note, if we had a requirement at 2.0, these are a set of components that are the exact same components, just used with 4 different measurement techniques. We use a CMM in a specific program. We have a capability number 5.7, very robust, much better than 6 Sigma requirement. If you were to measure that same set of parts with a vision system, you would now be failing. Yeah, your R&R is 45, and that's a little bit high. You want to try to get that down around 20 if you possibly can, or even lower. The CMM gives you a very robust, good R&R, and you have good data. So this is an example. You're trying to submit an approval package. You're trying to prove that these components are robust, that they're going to meet the requirements and the dimensional specifications. In this case, it's all down to the equipment you're using to measure that. You could have the best process controls in place, using your RJG sensors. You've got a brand new machine. It's very repeatable. You've got a good material, and it's coming down to the last step in the process, which is the equipment you're using to measure these components. Let's take a look at this one specific example, and it tells you how you can use data to guide your path forward. We do have a questionable method. Your R&R is above 20%. We have a CPK number 1.007, would fail the 1.33 requirement, would fail the 2.0 requirement. But what we do have is a fairly robust CP of 5.57. So what this is telling us is if we were to center the average number, your 0.510 is your nominal, you're getting an average of 0.5124. If you were to center that average with the same standard deviation and the same R&R, now you have an acceptable CPK. This is telling you that just looking at this specific set of data, your process may be fine, your controls are good, you have the right material, you have a possible positive outcome, the steel's just not in the right place. So we looked at metrology information before. Now we're looking at steel, and we're saying, hey, if we make a steel safe change, we planned for this up front, knowing it's a fine tolerance of 0024. We make that adjustment to the steel. Should take about a week. You run the sample again very quickly. You run a quick confirmation on a CMM to ensure that you have good data going forward. Taking that same set of data they looked at before, the 0.510 plus or minus 3, there may be times where we ask to further reduce tolerance. And in this specific case, using a CMM, it allows us to do that. So we could take those same set of components without remeasuring, minimize your tolerance to actually plus or minus just over 0.5 thousandths, and you still have a repeatable, robust CPK of above 6 sigma at the 2.042. Using the same components, just optimizing your measurement technique. Again, if you fell back on the manual CMM or the vision system for those two examples, you would be going down the wrong path. You'd be making tool changes that you don't need. You'd be costing your project time that you don't need. You'd be delaying your customer speed to market, all because of an improper measurement technique and not using the data to your advantage and to tell which path to guide you forward. This is a tight tolerance component. Just another quick comparison of heights for flexible semi-crystalline material. We're using a CMM vision system, an indicator, and some calipers. Again, this tells you CMM is not always the best way to measure this. This is a soft, flexible component that's going to deflect a little bit and give a little bit under any type of touch probe, even something as light as a CMM. In this particular case, you have a vision system requirement where you do have a CPK of 1.939, not quite to the 2.0, but if you go back, remeasure the components, take another look at the fixture, do what you can to lower that R&R a little bit, you'd probably be pretty close to the 2.0 requirement if you had it. The CMM, the indicator, and the caliper, again, would lead you down a path of having to fix something or having to tune something that may not necessarily be bad or out of specification and may function just fine. This is another tight tolerance for a flexible semi-crystalline material. Again, the CMM vision systems, manual CMM, caliper. Unfortunately with this one, we don't have an acceptable solution. We don't have a positive path forward. We tried 4 different measurement techniques, 4 different pieces of specialized equipment that are all supposed to do just this, which is measure plastic components to a very tight requirement. We don't have a way out of this one. Is it a no-win situation? It's not a no-win situation. You have to use the engineering tools available at your disposal to plan a successful path forward. We have a 39 R&R. Focus on reducing that R&R. Go deep into the data. Is there an outlier there? Are you measuring or hitting a CMM probe on a piece of flash or on sync or something else that's giving you a level of variation that you don't want? Maybe your components just aren't round. If this is a diameter, you find the min and the max. Are you reporting an average? Are you reporting one of those min and those maxes? Maybe you want to go back from a processing standpoint. Are your parts just too oval? Are your min and your max too far apart that you're not getting a good repeatable average number? Maybe you want to focus the screening or modeling DOE on the ovality of that. And you can improve your fixturing as well. Maybe your fixturing's collapsing or closing those components. Or examine the mating part tolerance. We have a plus or minus 5 here that we say we fail from a CPK standpoint. If you go back 2 or 3 examples ago, we were able to reduce the tolerance of that other component because we were very robust and reliable and robust, excuse me. Maybe redoing your tolerance stack up with a tighter tolerance component that mates to this allows you to open that plus or minus 5 up to say plus or minus 7 or plus or minus 8 and give you a better CPK and a plan to path forward. And that's where the project management aspect of it ties together, bring everybody to the same table, make the right decisions going forward. And unfortunately, you may need to rely on a plan B or a plan C. You may need to attribute measure or functionally test those components. If this is a pressure seal, this was actually a funnel that snaps over a pressured piece of filtration media. Is actually run a few hundred components through a test. Improve reliability by that means. Or plan C would be 100% process verification and or possible part sorting. Again, there's avenues you don't want to go down. They add time, they add cost, but you may not have a choice in that particular instance. The key to tying all of that together is solid project management. Ensure that everybody is communicating in an aggressive manner, that you identify risks early on, you have a plan to mitigate those risks, and everybody's, to use an expression, everybody's rowing in the same direction from a risk standpoint. If you have a tight tolerance, your design is demanding a tight tolerance, it's not just the processor's problem, it's not just the mold builder's problem, it's the team's problem. You need to examine all possible solutions. You need to have an appropriate plan in place up front. You need to tie it together with solid, robust project management and be able to react and escalate items very quickly as they are needed, and you shouldn't have any problem being successful. You can stop by our booth, CI Medical Technologies. Involve us early on in your design, and we're booth 2808. If you have anything that you want to look at, or you want to talk, or you have further questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and we have a couple of minutes. So if you have questions, yes sir. There's a microphone going around for your questions.
Yeah, I thought I heard you say that maybe you can go to attribute. Mm-hmm. How does that help?
How does that help? Well, an attribute inspection, forget my exact statistics here, but if you were to use a component or a piece count to say 298 parts to give you 99% accuracy and 95% of the confidence, maybe that risk factor is enough for the robustness of your design. So if you were to say, hey, I can't get good data on a plus or minus 1, but if I were to use a go or a no-go fixture and I pass every component within 298, your variability may bounce around in that window, but you've proven it's not going to go outside of that window. And that's what I mean by an attribute test. Did I answer your question? Awesome. Any other questions? Uh-oh.
Jared, can you speak to the effectiveness of predictive software like Moldflow when it comes to tolerance control?
Yeah, certainly can. I did have that in one of my slides. I don't know that I exactly pointed that out, but there are a lot of tools out there from a predictive analysis standpoint to be able to help with that. Moldflow, Sigmasoft, Molex, programs like that, that you're able to actually input the specific design of your tooling, your cooling channels, your gate locations, your runners, and be able to identify areas of warp or inconsistent shrink. So you can look at a warp plot and really be able to predict, is this component going to warp too much or be too inconsistent from a standpoint that it's not going to give me the indicator that I want to be successful moving forward. It'll also indicate areas of sink using a volumetric shrinkage output. And I think Moldflow has a sink index output now as well. To be able to tell you, hey, this area is going to sink. It's not going to sink the same every time over the next 3 to 20 years of production due to differences in the viscosity of your material. If you have a CTQ or a tight tolerance dimension on that specific area of sink or a surface flatness or it's a sealing surface or something like that, you need to really seriously reconsider redesigning that component. You're doing that all up front in a predictive engineering standpoint so that you can make 6 or 7 design changes in a day and run simulations on them in Moldflow without going through a week every time you're looking to tune a steel mold that's already built. Good question. Sir, microphone coming around for you.
Could you tell about more DOE? How many variables you think that it's better to control each time or do the experiment, and what will be the average cost and time to do an DOE?
Yeah, you're right. That's something you have to balance as well. And a good project plan up front, if you identify the risk that, hey, we're going to have to do a DOE on this, say flatness or ovality or roundness or surface shape or whatever it may be. I mean, there's not really a right way to do that. You really need to sit down as a group with your project team, use your best engineering judgment to determine a plan going forward. We've run DOEs at CI for flatness on a filter component where we screen 14 different variables up front. And it's your pack pressures, your temperatures, differential mold temperatures, A half to B half to control flatness. We looked at different lots of material. We looked at different drying times, back pressures, really whatever you can think of that may potentially have an impact on that. The downside is it does take time. It'll take you a few days to run a robust matrix. It'll take you a few more days to measure the parts and the outcome. But if you look at 13 or 14 factors up front in your screening DOE, you would hopefully be able to narrow that down to 4 or 5 for your modeling DOE, and then use your predicted math model as an output to give you an idea of where your process from a theoretical and a math model standpoint should be, and then you obviously need to confirm that. And your R-squared value is going to tell you whether you made the right call up front from an engineering standpoint. If you have a high R-squared value, we usually look for greater than 80%. That means you're explaining more than 80% of the variation that you're seeing in each component by the right parameters up front. If you get an R-squared value that's, say, 20 or 40%, either something else is going on that's causing noise in that process that you didn't control through your DOE, or you just didn't pick a right factor up front. If you go right to the stage of the modeling DOE, again, it's a risk versus reward. Your reward is you're able to save time, but your risk is that what's forcing change or a signal in your process isn't necessarily something that you may pick up on as 4 or 5 factors. It may take 2 weeks less to run it, but a lot of it's going to come down to how confident you are in your engineering. If it's, say you run hundreds of molds in polycarbonate, you probably have a good idea of what's going to affect dimensional instability in polycarbonate up front. So you have to do your engineering up front, right? Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for your time, everybody, and good job.